Hi guys, Ralphie here. I want to share with you a definitive way to create Samba shares on your network. Um, for this tutorial, we're going to do very basic things, and we're going to do some advanced sharing as well on a standalone Samba server. So no domains or anything like that, but creating multiple shares and allowing different users having access to the shares and so on. And we will also make sure that we go right to the very basics so we can figure out most of the common issues that users have when creating shares. In my case, I'm using a Linux Light box, but this is going to apply to pretty much any Samba share. So the default configuration of your Samba here, it's usually under etc Samba, and the file name it's called smb.conf. I'm sorry. So that's something like that is going to be your default SMB configuration file. This is the default for Linux Lite, but we're going to edit all of that, or at least most of that. That way we go together through the process of configuring Samba server and on shares and so on. So stick with me. It's going to take a while, but I'm pretty sure you're going to learn how to do some interesting stuff. All right. Well, let's get started. You can either delete that file we were the Samba configuration file. You can either configure it through the terminal, or you can use your favorite text editor, whatnot. So either way, oops, I'm sorry, no nano. So you can use a text editor. LeafPad is the default in Linux Lite. There we go. Use whatever application comes with your operating system. If you're running a desktop version, and Mint, you have a Zed. Um, on Ubuntu, you have a gedit, and so on. So just feel free to use the one you feel more comfortable with. I'm gonna be using myself the network share settings in Linux Lite because it's easy and it opens in LeafPad. Okay, so first of all, Linux Lite comes with a share already defined. Obviously, the directory, it's not the folder for the share does not exist. But out of the box, you're going to be able to, as long as you have defined your default global settings and your Samba service is running. Let's go into our Windows client machine here. I'm pretty sure we can access that server right now. As you can see, there is one share. Obviously, we're not going to be able to access it yet, but there is one share there, and the name here is share. So before we get rid of this, because we're going to delete that and create our own, let's go ahead and make sure we understand what the share name is going to look like. So when you access your Linux box on your network, if you do not see it on your network, if you don't have a DNS resolution, or for whatever reason you don't have WINS or anything, or DNS in your server, in your network, I'm pretty sure you have at least broadcasting, because you're getting an IP address from a DHCP server somewhere in your network. So it should show up. If it doesn't show up, you can always use the IP address to browse to your share. In my case, my Linux box is the 174, and it's going to take us to the same place. There you go. That's the same share. So let's learn how to name the share. What you see in here within the brackets, it's the name that it's going to show up for your users on the network. So if we change that to, let's say, my share 1, save those changes and restart the SMB service, that name is going to change as well. So let's refresh that share. And Windows 10 has just decided to give me a little bit of a headache, as usual. Windows. Okay, there we go. As you can see, there it is, my share 1, and there's also comments there. So you can add comments to your share to identify them better. Let's do that next. Go back to your configuration file in Samba, and let's add a comment to it. It's as simple as setting up comment equal and then your comment. This is my share. So let's restart the service. And now you know how to create your shares and add a comment to it. So up to this point, we know what's going on. So we're good. Let's go back to our configuration file and let's get into our cool stuff. So let's delete that first share that is created by default. I don't want any of that right now. And let's focus on our global configuration. So first of all, you have to make sure that your workgroup matches your Windows computer's workgroup or the workgroup in your network. By default, Windows workgroup, it's workgroup, and that's what it's defined up there. So if you look here, workgroup, it's workgroup. So if we decided to change the workgroup, let's change that together and let's name it Office. You're going to have to restart your computer for those changes to take effect, but you will do the same here. Workgroup, Office, and every other computer on the network should be part of the same workgroup. So by default, that workgroup, it's workgroup. And we're going to leave it as that for now. Restart later, and I don't think we have to restart right now. We should be able to get into it just fine. If it gives any kind of problem, we'll reboot the machine, but should be okay. Then you have a server string in your configuration. But before we get into that server string, there's a couple of things I would like to add myself. One of them being a log file, because I want to make sure I log my my SMB activity. So I'm gonna set that to log Samba, which is the default directory for login, and then I'm gonna do log and month, or net month machine in this case actually. So all we did there is just creating a log file, not using the default by defining our own. That way we can have a log of each machine accessing. Let's take a look at that. And as you can see, we have the IP address of the machine, or either the host name or the IP address of the machine accessing the network. So there's a couple of machines here that have been accessing my logs before, my Samba share before in this machine, so on this Linux box. So they're there. Now you know how to define your log file and see what activity each machine is doing. Another thing I like to add, it's the panic action, what to do. But we won't actually get into this one. You can find in the documentation, in the SMB documentation, I suggest you to read about it, what it is about, what to do with it, just to keep it simple. But I like it. I like having it there in my configuration. Then we're going to have our server string. The server string, it's nothing else but the name you would like to assign to your Samba server. So when we go into Windows and we do a net view, we can actually see the name. This case should be light file server. So let's do a net view. And there you goes. That's the host name, and that's the server string we added to that configuration. So you can actually identify. I have another couple of servers in the network, and I can identify them not only by the host name, but by the remarks, which is what they call it in Windows, for instance. And after you do your server string, you want to make sure your netbios, that's very important. Your netbios needs to match your host name, the name of the computer where you're running your Samba server. In this case, mine, as you can see, it's Linux Lite 3 or 34. That's where my host server is. That's why my netbios name is in my Samba configuration. So another way to find out, you type host name, and you're gonna get the host name of the computer, but you have it right there. So that's very important. If you don't set the proper netbios name, you're not gonna be able to connect to your server. So that's something we need to figure out and make sure it's there. Then you have the security option. You got a couple of security authentication mechanisms. Read about it in the smb.conf configuration documentation, but pretty much you got share, you got user. You want to use user in this case. We want to authenticate our users, our local users, with our sambashare users. Encrypt password, yes, that's fine. Then we got a map, username map. This is the file that is going to map our local accounts with our sambashare accounts. So for instance, in my, let me just try to make it easier for you guys. If we take a look at my accounts on this computer, I have a couple of users there already, and we need to have those users add them into our Samba users so that they can access the shares later on, depending on the permissions we set and everything else. So let's take a look at the users I have in my computer here. And I have two users so far, Rafi, which is the account I'm working on right now. And then we have Gemma, which is a user account we're going to be using for testing later on, for testing our shares. So those are the two users I have in my computer. And we're going to use this username map to map our computer users with our sambashare users. Clear? So then we have a couple of other settings there. Map to guest, bad user. Basically, you're going to tell the server is going to, the Samba server it's going to deal with any other user that is not authenticated or that is authenticated as guest as a bad user, not identified, not local on the server. So, and it's going to put some restrictions on it, obviously. Guest account, defining your guest account. In this case, it's going to be nobody. Again, you can read about it, about all these settings in the smb.conf file. Let's find out about guest account, for example. And there you go. So this is the account that basically allows guests to access services which are specified as guest OK. So no identification, not authentication whatsoever. Simple, have it there. And then you have a DNS proxy. So on top of that, there is a couple of other things I like to add myself. For instance, well, let's save this, for example, and give it a spin as it is right now. I know it's going to take a little while. I'm sorry for those of you guys that are used to set up this already. As you can see, we have no shares, but the Samba service is running, so I can actually access my Linux Lightbox. It's just not going to give me any shares whatsoever. Now I can't add anything to it. We don't have any shares yet. So the first most common issue that we find about it's creating an account for creating a guest account, or I mean a share for all users without authentication on the network. So we're going to go back to this global settings later on, but let's start creating our first share by creating a share where anybody on the network can read and write to it. So the way to do that is rather simple. You're going to create your guest folder. You can name it anything. I'm going to call mine guests. So that's going to be my guest share. Then I'm going to add a comment to it, and we're going to define that comment as guests network share. After that, we have to define a path. So the path is in our local computer. Where is it going to be stored? That share. Where are we going to store the files that users are going to put in that share? So let's define that physically in the network. It's here. Oh, I already had that folder. Let me delete that because I'm going to be using something like that, but from scratch. And I'm going to call it shares. And this is the way I personally like to do it. I like to create a root folder, and inside of it, then I create my subfolders. In this case, I'm going to create the guests folder in there, inside my shares, because we're going to have different folders in here later on, and I don't want to have all those in the root of my home directory. So I just create one directory and a bunch of subdirectories within it. That's the way I like it. So the path is going to be home, Ralphie. I've seen many users use %u for the home user, but in this case I'm going to use Ralphie or whatever your home directory name is. In my case is Ralphie. I recommend you to do a hard name, So yeah, Ralphie, and that's going to be the path for my guests folder. Now then we're going to have a couple of settings we need to set to actually allow everything into that folder. I mean permissions in that folder per se, share access, and we're going to start with browse able. Yes, I want to make sure it's browse able, that people can browse and get to it. Then we're going to do guest OK, and make sure it's also yes. That way guests can get to that folder without authentication. Write able or readable. Yes, as well. And we're going to leave it as that for now, because we're going to have to come back to these global settings and work a little bit with permissions, and this is going to be cool actually. So let's save that for now. Let's restart our service, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to see that share on the network, but we're not going to be able to write to it yet. So let's try to create a folder, and we're going to get an error. There we go. We don't have the permissions. So what happened? I'll tell you what happens. And this is a common issue. But right now the share is showing for everybody, and everybody has access, which is something we were trying to do. Now we need to deal with permission. Now if you go to your in your home directory, by default, only you have access to read and write on your home directory. So as long as you decide to create the shares in your home directory, or even if you decide to create your shares in a complete separate hard disk, you need to create some type of permissions. You need to allow to write to it. And the way I do it, and the way that it's actually done most of the time, you're going to set some specific permissions in your configuration. And basically we're going to tell Samba to force specific users and also force specific groups. Now, in my case, we're going to start with a force user in the global configuration, and the user, the owner of that share, of that folder in my home directory, it's Ralphie. So I'm going to force the user Ralphie, and I want to also force a group. So I'm going to force group, and I'm going to use sambashare in this case. Why sambashare and not Ralphie? Well, let's try with Ralphie. Restarting the service. Let me refresh that. And let's try to create a new folder. As you can see, it has the permissions. It was created by somebody else, but it has the permissions we set. I just like my global configuration to force the sambashare group instead of my user. That's why. So I'm going to go back to the configuration. It's easier for me to manage since this is a standalone server. Permissions or access per se, it's kind of a little it's not very convenient to set up. So I try to make my life as easier as possible by using sambashare. Once you get used to it and start working with it, decide to do it the way you want or the way you feel more comfortable with. For now, I'm going to use my sambashare group. That's where I'm going to force on the folders. And another couple of things that I would like to add, since these are going to be shares, I also like to, on top of forcing users, I like to set up specific folder and files permissions. So we're going to create a mask for, this is for files. We're going to do 76, actually let's do 0760. And then we're going to create a directory mask. And we're going to do that 0760. So no execute bit for any of them. I don't want anybody executing anything on my shares at all. So let's give that directory. There we go. Let's give that a go. And let's delete that. And create a new folder. Actually, let's leave it here in the root so we can see both permissions for directories and also for files. Okay, let's go back into share guests. Let's take a look at those two files there. Now the group should be sambashare. That's the group we define in our configuration. User, we are forcing user Ralphie. And if we look at the txt file, there we go. And if we look at the test folder, those are the permissions there. That's the way I'd like to do it. Feel free to apply different masks if you feel like it. You could do something or just leave the default by removing these two if you wanted to. Let's just delete them both and take a look at what's different in those permissions. And pretty much in text 1, you got the read and execute bit enable, and in the test and the txt, you have the read bit enable there. So that's basically the difference between the two. Feel free to use either or. So far we have our share created, our first share, which is available for guests and everybody else in the network. And that's something that it's usually problematic for people to find out why it's not allowing me. What we do is you do guest OK, and it will allow the guest to go in. Now, another cool thing that it's common for people to ask about, it's the RecycleBin for your directories, for your shares on the network. So let's go ahead and create a couple of directories, or actually let's go ahead and enable a RecycleBin. So let's create a RecycleBin, for example. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and I already have it defined here somewhere. I'm going to copy that over. I'm going to put it under my global configuration. So that's the enable RecycleBin for Samba 3.8 and onwards. It's usable. It's already there. So you probably have that enabled in your Samba already. So we're going to create a RecycleBin, and the home directory for that is going to be Ralphie shares RecycleBin. So we need to create that RecycleBin in our shares folder. There we have a RecycleBin, and here we have the user. We're going to keep it organized by user, so depending on the user that deletes it, it's the folder there is going to go into. I like to put it inside my global settings so it applies to everybody. That way I have a single trash for everybody on the network. They don't see the trash, they don't have access to it, but Ralphie's account does have access to it. So, and now I'm going to add my, oh, this is homes. Hold on, before I get into homes, let me add the RecycleBin folder, because that folder needs to be a share, needs to be in the shares, so that Samba can actually move the file from whatever directory is being deleted from into your RecycleBin. And I'm gonna say browsable no, public no, and writable yes. That's all we need for that, and Ralphie, the user Ralphie, it's gonna have access to that. It's gonna be able to write into it. So that's our RecycleBin settings, or parameters in this case. Let's save that. Oh, I didn't explain it much, but I excluded a bunch of files. Like over here, we got log and you got temp. When you're working on a share in Windows, for instance, you got a Word, Excel, spreadsheets, and so on. It creates a bunch of temporary files with the files being edited and whatnot. So I want to exclude all those uh, from my recycle bin. And there's something here commented with it minimum size, but I'm gonna go ahead and delete it. If you want to specify a minimum size for an item to be moved into your recycle, then you will use recycle minimum size option. So let's just leave that there. Let's remove it actually, and remember you have that SMB configuration documentation. Go through it, and you probably can, and you will find more values about what to do with the recycle. But these are the settings I use, and I'm pretty sure you can replicate that. I'll write it down in the description or something, as well as the other configurations, so you guys can use it or test it and whatnot. So in this case, I have the U, the %U there. I'm going to change that to Ralphie as well. I want that path we set up before. That's where I want to use, and I don't want to use the %U, capital U over here. That's not where I like that for. So, okay, so let's go ahead and test that out. Let's save these changes, restart the service, and we still have that guest folder with access for everybody, so no authentication needed. Just click on it and you're there. Let's add something that is not an empty folder, because the empty folder is not going to, doesn't have any size. It's not going to go into the trash, into the recycle bin. But if we copy something with a little bit of a size there you go. That's like 8 megabytes, I think. Yeah, there you go. So let's go ahead and delete it, and let's check our recycle bin. Shares, recycle, Nikki, which is it's the user account for this Windows user. It's creating the user, it's adding the username. See, that way you can actually identify which user deleted it. And there you go, that's CCleaner. So we can take that and put it back inside our guest share in case it was deleted by mistake, and there we have it. So now you have a nice recycle bin on your network shares. That way somebody deletes anything by mistake, you can always recover it. Cool, right? Yeah, let's delete that again. We don't need that. And now that we have worked with no authenticated users yet, we're going to go into authenticated users. Okay, authenticated users time. So as I showed you before, I have 2 accounts in my Linux box. We need to, there is Rafi and there is Jaime, and these are the 2 accounts we're going to add into our sambashare authentication next, so we can authenticate these computers users through our Samba services. For that, there's a very simple command that you're going to execute. I'm going to copy it there from there, where it's basically a sudo smbpasswd to add a password to the account. For a account name. Well, let me delete that because we want to create it for account Rafi. Don't know what's wrong with my keyboard, sorry. Rafi. So let me, my sudo password, and now it's going to ask you for the SMB password. So let me go ahead and create a password for Rafi something. And let's create another the SMB password for the account Jaima. Perfect. Once we have set up those two passwords, these are the passwords that you're going to use for your SMB authentication. Once you create those two, or as many accounts as you have on your computer, we'll go later on over creating accounts with no login on your computer, but still being able to access specific shares maybe. But for now, yeah, those are the two accounts we have, and we have assigned the password already. We have set up our SMB password with that sudo SMB password add command. And now we need to go to our SMB. Let's etc Samba. There's an SMB users there, and we need to map. Remember that SMB configuration? Let's cat that again. Let's take a look at that again. Remember, we have a username map etc Samba SMB users. Well, we're going to use that file now to map our SMB users to our local account users. So let's actually use a text editor. Just in case it's more comfortable for you to see. And by default, this is the one that comes with Linux Lite. I'm going to delete that. I don't need any of that. I'm going to set up Rafi equals Rafi, and then Jaima equals Jaima. So basically here, what we're doing is telling Samba, okay, the user Rafi in the local computer, map it to, map it to Rafi SMB user, and the user Jaima, map it to Jaima. Let's leave it there for now, and let's come back to that, and we'll test it out together, and maybe change it so you understand what it's actually happening there. So we have our two users, our two SMB users now, and we already set up the password for them. So that means we can now access a share if we had one with authentication. So let's go back to our shares for a minute, and let's create some of another share that happens to be kind of problematic for some users, the home folder. So we have this is just RecycleBin here, and we have our guest. Let's go back to Windows for a moment. We have our guest folder, share folder there. So now what we're going to do is let's go ahead and add our home directories. Let's share our home directories over the network. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste because I already have it there. So my homes folder, and this is this home here. There are three special sections in your SMB configuration file, one being global, the other one being homes specifically, and the last one being printers. So those are special sections that Samba server it's gonna treat in a very specific way. So if you want to share your home directories, your users' home directories, make sure you use homes, which, like we just said, it's a special section in your configuration file. Let's add a comment. Actually, I want to put a comment to that. Users home folder. Sorry. Or just call it a home directory. And then you're going to set up a path. As you can see, the path is pointing to home S. So we're going to use the substitution here for the user name login into SMB. If it was Ralphie, that will be home Ralphie, and that's the home folder for the user Ralphie, home Ralphie. Or home Jaima, it will be same thing. So that's what that %S substitution does. So, oh, I had a comment here already for home directories. I didn't notice, I'm sorry. And then we're going to make sure it's browsable or browsable, if you want to call it. I call it browsable. Valid users, this is important. So we want to make sure we pass the %U, which is the user authenticating on the SMB server. And then we're going to make sure it's writable or readable. Yes. And something very important is to make sure that we force the user and we force the group as user as well. Remember up here, we set up force user globally. We're forcing user Ralphie and group sambashare. Well, in your home directory, you want to make sure you force a different user. In this case, the user that is actually being logged into the home directory. Otherwise, it's not going to have the proper permissions to read and write. Okay, we can comment that for a moment and test it out together if you want. Let's see. Let's save those changes and restart the service. And now we should see a homes share. There it is. If you double click on it from Windows, nothing is going to happen because you need to map it actually and authenticate to that share. That's specific to home directories. So I'm going to log in as Jaima, for example. And we're going to be able to access Jaima's home folder. Now let's create a file on the desktop as Jaima. And you don't have the permissions. Why not? Because you're trying to write on Jaima's home directory as user. Let's open that up as user Ralphie. That's the reason why in our homes directory we want to force the user and force the group as user. If we go to Jaima's home directory, let's browse to it. Actually, it's in desktop. Sorry. If we look there, there is a user Jaima group Jaima. So we want to make sure we replicate and we force that users when it comes specifically to home directories. Let's uncomment that. Save it and restart our services. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be able, because now we have the right permissions, we're going to be able to create the folder. There you go. So the folder has been created as user Jaima and group Jaima. That's good. So now you know how to create home directories as well, and you know how to map it to your Windows computer. There you go. That's the home directory for Jaima. Let me disconnect from that. And in our shares, we have guests and home. So yeah, so far we have a public folder or a guest folder for everybody, and we have our homes or home directories for users in your local machine. That way you can access all your files and folders within each user home directory. Yeah, it's very important to make sure in the path to make sure you use that %S substitution because if you happen to share something like home, that's dangerous. It's going to have everybody, including guests, are going to have access to your home shares, to your home directories with read and write permissions. So make sure you don't skip that. Okay, well, it's time to work with authentication. We already authenticated for home directories, but we want to create some shares and authenticate. So let's get into that. That's going to be a very fun part. So first of all, we have a guest folder, which everybody can write to it, and everybody can read. Now, we would like to create something similar, but in case of calling it guest, I want to create a public folder. The difference being that this public folder is going to be available only for users in the sambashare or users in your computer. That means, what I mean by that is, I want a public folder that all users are able to write and read from it or into it, but no guest access. All right, let's work on that next. So I have I already have it here. Well, I have the first part of it at least. And I'm just gonna copy it and explain it as we go. So we're gonna have a public folder. The comment is gonna be public user share. That means all my users on the network are going to be able to read and write. All my users in my computer, are going to be able to read or write into it, but no guest access. We want to deny get access and allow regular authenticated users to read or write into it. Okay, just in case we happen to share folders or files over the network within, let's say, me and my wife, but at the same time they're guests on the network, and I don't want those guests having access to those files. That's what that share will be for. And then now this way we can test a couple of different permissions and settings. So I have the path here. The path is going to be home Ralphie shares public. So we need to create that public folder inside my shares. It's not there. See, the reason why I like to create a single folder and then a bunch of subfolders in it. That way I can have my RecycleBin in it, my guest folder, my public folder organized in a way that it's simple for me to follow. Then we're going to make it available, yes, but this option here by default in Samba, it's set to yes. Unless you want to make the share unavailable, you'll go available no. So I'm going to remove it. I don't like adding stuff to my configuration unless I really need to. Then we're going to have some valid users, and this is where it's going to allow us to actually limit the access to that share. So I want my users, that means authenticated users, %U, and authenticated groups to be able to access that public folder. And I'm going to allow users, my authenticated users, to write into it. So you will create a write list, and in this case I'm going to allow my users on my computer. You could actually define that as Ralphie and Jaima if you wanted to. In my case, there is really no. I just have a couple of users there, so it really doesn't make much sense if I if I use %U or if I use my two users. So let's assume I have a bunch more users that I want to have allow access to. I'll just do %U, and that way I'm allowing all users. If you just want specific users to have access to read to it, to write to it, you will do, then you can specify the users like Ralphie and Jaima. Alrighty, so yeah, for now I'm just going to leave it %U. You get the idea. Public no. This public option here public and guest OK is basically the same thing. So you could either do public no, and in this case, since I'm calling the folder public, I'm gonna, instead of using public no, that way it's not available for guests. What I'm gonna do is guests to use exactly, get used to use the correct or the most common way to do it. Guest OK, no. So instead of having guest OK in one and public in another, guest OK and public, they do the same thing. They're the same thing. You can read about it in the documentation. Let's find about it. Public. Yeah, public. This parameter is a synonym of guest OK. So cool. That means instead of using public in one configuration and guest or guest OK in another one, I'm just gonna use guest. Keep it uniform. So guest work for me, and then we have readable. So yeah, my bad. Use percent user, percent capital U, so which is the substitution for the user that is logging into the SMB. Or you can specify the valid users by manually typing them out. Let's say you have like 10 users and you just want 3 users to have access, or 2 users. In this case, I'll do Rafi and Jaima. So that's an account. That's a share folder with authentication. And if we go back to Windows and to our shares, now we have a public folder there. We have a Jaima's home folder because we already log in as Jaima, so Jaima home folder is going to show there. So that's Jaima's home folder. And we have, we have our guest, for which we don't need any authentication whatsoever, and the public folder, which is asking for authentication. So let's see if we can delete that. Okay, we have connected the public right now. So let's see if we can delete that public instead. And just wait a little bit for Windows to actually process that. That way there is no authenticated users on that public folder. And we can get to it as guest again. Yeah, there we go. Jaima is not showing up again. So if I click public, it's going to ask you for authentication, which is good. Guest, we don't need authentication for that. And home directories, which are going to show up only after you authenticate. So either you map it, as we said before, or just authenticate to one of the shares that requires authentication, and your home directory is going to pop up within your shares. So cool. Now we have another share that requires authentication, and in our Samba configuration, so far we have a RecycleBin, we have a public guest and share folder, we have our homes directories, and we have a public folder for users, for local users that requires authentication. So that's a way to have different access and different shares in Samba, in your Samba configuration. Let's see. Let's create one last share. This time we're going to go ahead and create a share. Let's see. Maybe we should ask for a share with. All right. Let's do something else. This last one. Let's create a share with read and write access for Rafi account, but only read access for Jaima in this case. So let's have a specific user's access with read and write permissions to a share, and let's have another user with only read access to it. So let me create a private share, or maybe I should name it. Let's see. Let me just copy this here and use it as an example. So I'm going to call it private folder, and my comment is going to be private share 2. That's fine. Well, private share. And to this private share, this is not the, so let me create that directory there, and private share. My directory is being created, so I'm going to set the correct path here. Private share, and browsable, yes. Guest, okay, no. Read list, so all sambashare, or all sambashare, all users in the sambashare group are going to be able to read that folder, but only Ralphie is going to be able to write into it. Available, like I said before, we don't really need that. Masks, we're not going to put any mask into it. We're taking the defaults, and we're not going to force any root user there. And the public no, but public no and guest okay no is the same thing, so we're going to remove that as well. So this private folder here should give us access is browsable, so it's going to show up on the network. No guest access, so no guest can get to it. Users allowed to read that directory, all users in the sambashare group, and write list only Ralphie. So yeah, that should do it. And that should give us another example how to allow some specific users. Yeah, I know. It's telling me, it's complaining about having a long share name. I don't mind. I don't care about that. That's the name I want to assign to it. It's not a good idea, or it's not best practice to create shares with space in between. But that's okay. That should work anyways. So it's going to ask you for authentication, because let's go back to that configuration for a moment. So what we have so far, it's we're authenticated. It's browsable, so we should see it. It is there. It has the common private share, and right now we have write list Ralphie only, and everybody else has read access to it. So let's see if that's the case. Let's go ahead and authenticate as Jaima, and we can access it. But if we try to create a file, we shouldn't have the permissions to do so. Perfect. So if I create a file in that private share, Jaima should be, oh, I'm sorry. Jaima should be able to read that file. She shouldn't have access, or she doesn't have permissions to edit the file. So let me just, let's go back to our share there, and we can read the file. We cannot edit the file because we don't have the permissions for it. So that's another way to, that's another type of share you want to do. Different, basic different access without having to go deep into ACL permissions or anything like that. So there you have it. You have home directories, you have private folders, you have guest shares, access for all guests with no authentication needed. Then you have a home directory share. Then you have a public share only for all users, all authenticated users in your Samba server. And finally, you have a private folder for authenticated users with specific permissions. Some have read and write permissions, and others can only read. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up now. I think this is good enough, and the video it's been long enough already. But before I go, I'm sorry. But before I go, I'm gonna go ahead and private folder. Netbios delete and private folder. I'm pretty sure in Windows that's how you do it. But then again, okay, well let me log out to sign out of that session and log in again. And this time we're going to authenticate on that share as Ralphie. That way we can actually check our private folder and make sure Ralphie has right permissions. So we're going to authenticate as Ralphie and logging into that share folder. Give it a second. That's Windows thinking about something again. I'm not sure what folder is not accessible here, all right? I may not have the permissions. Really? Okay, well, you're going to run into this little things here and there with the Windows. Um, let's see if changing the folder name will make a difference. Or remove that extra space. There we go. It did make a difference. So yeah, don't create shares with spaces if you don't want to run into those type of issues. And Ralphie should have permissions to edit this file because he has right permissions in our share. There we go. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you find this video not only long but also useful. If you like it or if you learned something, give it a thumbs up. And thanks again for your time. Take care.